thank you all for attending, and thank you, Mr. Schletzbaum, for being here today and taking the time out to speak with us. I know that there's only like 8 participants right now, and like I'm sorry, but we tried our best to like reach out to people and like get them to attend, but we will be putting this on our YouTube channel, so hopefully more people will be able to view that and get all your knowledge and your story that you have to share today. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
Alrighty. Well, I see a lot of names I recognize, so a lot of you know me, but if you haven't known me, I'm Charles Schletzbaum. I'm a physics teacher at Milpitas High School and debate coach. Oh, wait. There we go. And I've been there since 2001. It's not the first place I ever taught. So the 21 years is a little off. It's actually more like 19. So if you could advance, since, yeah. So really going back, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. Barely remember it because my parents, who were both originally from Missouri and Kansas, although my mom was raised in California, moved very quickly down to the lower right to North Carolina. So I didn't get to grow up in the land of snow, although we did have snow, and school would get out even if we only had like an inch or two. Unlike later, I'll get to that. Okay, next. So I was an insular nerd, like didn't talk to people. Some of you are this person. Some of you know these people. Well, and then my sophomore year, which is our first year of college, I took debate as an elective. And basically that transformed me from a complete insular nerd into the boisterous, loud person that you guys know today, or most of you. Next. So the schools that I went to had some interesting things that you guys are probably not familiar with. So the school that I went to, Myers Park High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was one of 14 high schools at the time, there's more now, they were heavily tracked. Like all the way from maybe 4th or 5th grade on, they took your state test scores, your grades, and teacher recommendations. And from that point on, you were tracked into, for example, my senior calculus class, there was calculus. There was academically gifted calculus. There was AP calculus, and then there was academically gifted AP calculus. And English, senior English had 6 levels: AP, academically gifted, advanced, regular, and then 2 levels of remedial under that. So basically, your test scores in this school district really could determine what classes you took. The district I was also in had something going on that doesn't exist today because it got thrown out maybe 15 years ago. But in order to desegregate the schools, especially in the South, the schools that I went to, even though we were right beside the local country club, about 1/2 the population's worth of kids, and the school had 1,800 kids, was bused from where we lived to the poorer side of town, the economically disadvantaged area of the town. And vice versa. A huge chunk of their population was bused over an hour every morning to where I went to school. So this is why, even though the area that, if this had been a neighborhood school, the school would have been 95% white. And the school across town would have been 95% black, because this is the South. It was heavily racially divided. So one of the ways the school got around people bailing out to the private schools and there were a lot of them, like my neighbors where I lived, was to put certain, you couldn't take AP Bio at my school. To take AP Bio, you had to take it across town at a school in an economically disadvantaged area. So there was a lot of social experiments going on where I was growing up. Next. So, as I said, I was an insular nerd, and I was always into science, and my goal was to become a physicist. But because of my experience in debate, my fallback was going to be law. Like, at the very least, if physics didn't work out for me, I was going to be in patent law, because that's where a scientist's like tools are most applicable to law. Next. But so I had decent SATs, and even though I applied to 13 schools, the school that accepted me outright was Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which is sort of MIT light. It's about 40 miles west of Boston. And I was demographically selected, I believe, because there were three or four applicants from the entire state of North Carolina to this college. And most of the population comes from Massachusetts. Maybe 80-90% of the population of the school comes from the local state. So one interesting thing, if you're looking at a leg up for a lot of private schools, for those of you that are applying to college, if you are not in their normal demographics, including regional demographics, then you might actually have a leg up at some institutions because of how they want to like diversify their student body. Now, this school was at the time $12,000 a year, $6,000 for room and board. This was 1988. The same school now is $41,000 without room and board. So the prices are just exponentially higher for you guys than they were for me. Next. So some of you will discover this once you start living alone. Some of you are not great at scheduling, not good at waking up to alarm clocks. And well, I was one of those people. So those 8 o'clock classes did not go well for me. And this is also the same time I started coaching policy debate at a high school in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, which is, now keep in mind I had enough car, so I had to take a cab over, but it's about a 10-mile drive. And so I was there at practice too late. I come in an hour late for my Calc 3 final. And so that's the first class I failed in college. Because once I came in, the professor said it was too late, you can't take this. And the good news is the college that I went to, they gave A's, B's, or C's. There's no grade less than a C. If you get anything less than a C, it doesn't appear in your transcript. But it was also start to finals in 7 weeks. You took 4 quarters a year, and during the summer, you could take 2 summer quarters. So 3 classes at a time, 7 weeks to cram in what you guys in high school do in at least a semester, sometimes an entire year. So complete pressure cooker. All right, next. So I sort of ran out of financial aid. Like I said, at the time, that was an expensive school. So I took a gap year off, actually, I'd already started working, like, because I'd been paying my own rent and stuff like that for a while, even though my parents were still paying my tuition. And I sort of took a year off, and because of my experience in coaching debate, I decided, well, I'm too far to not get a degree in physics. And at this point, I had realized that I hated math, which is kind of ironic given the subject that I teach. That's not most math I hate, but once we get into double and triple integrals of trig functions, it just was not for me. And at this point, I realized that even if I get my physics degree, I'm not going to be able to be liking doing most of what would be required to be a lab rat or researcher, because I just did not like the math. So, and I got into physics for the philosophy of it, you know, NDT, Carl Sagan type things. Like, how did the universe begin? I'm the idea man. I'm not the math person that comes behind them and puts it all together. So I went to Worcester State College, which used to be Worcester State Teachers College, which is now Worcester State University. And my tuition dropped from $12,000 to $15,000 a year to $1,500 to $3,000 a year. So after I got my physics degree, I started my credential program, which lasted a year and a half. The first semester is pretty much all classes. Now this is Massachusetts, but it's similar if you don't. It's similar in California if you don't transfer in with a credential. I'll explain that part later. But your first semester is mostly classes. Your second semester is classes and going to observe at local schools and filling up an observation requirement. And then your third semester is actually doing student teaching at school with maybe one class on the side. Now, one thing they don't tell you about becoming a teacher is most of the time you are paying to work. You have basically, when I was teaching my class at my first school, which we can go to the next slide, I believe. So one of the things when you're putting together, like trying to get your credential, you have to keep a complete binder of everything you've done, all the lesson plans you've done, all like little papers that you have to write for your advisors, little things like demographic studies and other things like this. And it's this huge binder. And any of my students who know me know that organization is not my strong suit. This was absolute torture for me. So, but I managed to get through it with my binder. I did my interning teaching physics and integrated science at a place called Doherty Memorial High School in Worcester, Mass. Go ahead. And so after my internship, since I finished my internship and my credential in December, that's not a good time to be hired. So if you want to like finish on a good schedule, finish your credential right for the May like recess, because then you have jobs opening up for the summer. But like a lot of teachers, I had to like do student teaching. Now, one of the jobs I interviewed for was at Shrewsbury High School. This was the first job I interviewed for. Starting salary, $23,000. Didn't get it. Next. Now, I did get hired at the school that I did my apprenticeship at with a salary of $25,000 a year. This was 1997. So for me, not that far off. For you guys, longer than you've been alive. Go on. Now, this is the craziest thing ever. Look at the schedule. So this school wanted to do block scheduling, but it also had a vocational educational program where some of you probably have friends who halfway through the day leave campus and go to a job and an apprenticeship, or go to a job training and apprenticeship and then come back to school. Well, so this teacher, the principal of the school, had the same program, which is why 10th period, if you notice, everybody has 10th period every day at the same time. That's so the kids could leave school early. So for one period a day, everybody had a regular schedule. But if you look at that, like period Monday, everybody had shorter periods. And then because there were 3 lunch periods, you would have 5th lunch, while some people had 5, 6 as class. And if you had 5th lunch, you'd have 6, 7 as class, while some people had 6 of lunch and other people would go into 7 and 8. And if this looks insane, now look at the room numbers that are written in on the schedule. For example, my bio class Monday met in room 310 at 4th period, so at 9:56. But on Wednesday, they met in room 314, 1st period. It's like this, and if you can imagine how many of your your peers have trouble making it to classes when the schedule is completely set. This was a nightmare. Like, I can't even. So next, one of the things you're going to find if you ever go into education, there is a reasonable amount of politics. Now there's this with a lot of jobs. For example, knowing who to ask when certain jobs get posted is always advantageous. Knowing who in your class, for example, has a parent on the school board is always advantageous. For example, I had assigned a research paper to my biology class, my advanced biology class. Yes, I've taught biology, I've taught chemistry, I've taught sex ed, I've taught driver's ed. It's like, even if your credentials in a certain area, you get to wear a lot of hats. So I had a run-in with one of our school board members because his daughter accused me of losing his paper or her paper. And this happened right maybe a month or so before. When you work in this public school system, you get, if you're a first-year teacher or a second-year teacher, you can be fired for any reason. Don't like your hair? Too bad. You said a funny joke that I didn't like? Too bad. It's like anything, any smallest thing can possibly get you fired. You ever run in with a student and they start yelling that you assaulted them, even when 30 kids in the class say, no, that kid would like run up and screaming on you. This type of thing happens. You could get let go. You don't get fired. That's a different process altogether. But by a specific date in March, in most states, especially states with unions, you will be let know in your first or second year if you're coming back the following year. Now, right after the dates where they announce that, for example, well, you get your paperwork that you aren't coming back, this same student pulled the same thing on another first-year teacher. So I think it's telling that the kid learned if you pull one thing with one teacher, it'll work again in another, especially if you have a parent on the school board. So next. So I'm credentialed in Massachusetts, Alabama, and California. There's a difference in credentials. Like early teachers in California and a lot of states, once you had your credential, you were credentialed for life. You never have to renew it, anything. In Massachusetts, when I got my credential, I was credentialed for 5 years of employment. Now, by the end of this 5 years, you have to have a master's degree or you can't renew your credential. So I still have 4 years left on my Massachusetts credential. Alabama issued something slightly similar but without the master's requirement, but it expires by a certain date. So while Massachusetts is good for so many years of employment, Alabama and California expire on a certain date. Now, if you transfer in or if you transfer into a state, you usually have to go through some orientation program, take a couple extra classes to complete their credentialing program, even if you've already completed a credential program in another state. And there's something called the BITSA. Some of your first-year teachers, you might, if you've had them, have said, oh, I've got a meeting with my BITSA advisor this afternoon or something like that. This is a training program, it's like a mentorship program that even if you transfer in, if I had had 10 years of experience transferring in from another state, I'd still have to go through BITSA to get my credential for California. Good. Now, after I left my job in Massachusetts, I had met my wife on an internet playing a video game. Okay, not a video game, it was text-based. And I'd moved to Alabama. So I was trying to get hired there. And their salary at the time, the governor had just passed a law or a bill raising the state minimum teacher's salary to $28,000. Now, here's an example. And by the way, there's 19 states that are just like this. But after the announcements in the morning at Opp High School, where I was working for a semester, they call out a list of names. Those kids leave their classes, walk down to the principal's office. One by one, they go in, they put their hands on the principal's desk, bent over, and they get spanked. And there are 19 states where this is still legal right now. California is not one of them, but Alabama definitely still is. So there, if you were male, the principal spanked you. And if you were female, the volleyball coach spanked you. So there's some interesting things still out there in the land of education. Go ahead. Now, when I moved here, I was living in Turlock and I was teaching at a school called Delhi. I know you want to say Delhi, but remember, this is an agricultural area in the Central Valley. And to give you an idea of the education. So the school had always started every year with 180 freshmen, about 150 sophomores, 120 juniors, and about 90 seniors. Now my salary went up to $33K. As you can see, things are progressing. But here's the tricky part. Every freshman took the same classes, the same 7 classes, and they followed the exact set of students around all 7 of those classes. Like you literally stayed that entire year with the same group of kids through every class. And the same thing, maybe a different group of kids now, but the same thing your sophomore year. No electives. You get 1 elective your junior year and 2 electives your senior year. Everybody took integrated science 1. Everybody took integrated math 1. Everybody took integrated science 2. Junior year, you would get to take a year of biology, and senior year, you take a semester of physics and a semester of chem. Now, if you paid attention to the numbers, as I told you, you'll notice that about 30 kids disappeared from the school every year. Remember, this is in a heavily agricultural area. There were some bedroom community people starting to infiltrate the school system, you could say. But literally 30 of the students would be lost to the continuation school, the jail, or the foster farms plant, cutting up chicken every year. So this is not atypical of rural Central Valley, California type education. Kids just disappear out of the system or bail out to a continuation school. So after a year there, I got hired at my dream job. You can go on. Which is Milpitas High School. And it's very interesting because when I showed up for my interview, the assistant principal who eventually was principal, God, I'm totally blanking on his name, Ken Schlaff, showed up to do his interview for me for my teaching job, and an old athletic sweater and cut off athletics, like cut off sweatpants, which, as it turns out, was the perfect image to project for somebody teaching at Milpitas High School. When I was teaching in Massachusetts, when I was trying to teach in Alabama, whenever you're a young teacher, you are encouraged to be uber professional. And then after you get a few years under your belt, you realize that, you know, if you have to rely on looking professional for the kids to like respect you and listen to you, then that's not really going to work for you. Some people still have that, but as it turned out, once I joined the science department at Milpitas High School, I learned my fashion cues from the AP chemistry teacher, who was every day in Hawaiian shirts and shorts. Sounds familiar. So now, the first year I was at Milpitas High School, we were slightly overpopulated, even though it's about 500 students less than we have now, but we had less portables and a few other things. I had 3 classrooms. I would be in L34, I think, second period. I had first period prep. Then I had to pick up all my stuff, move across the hall. I think move to L36. I remember whose rooms they are, but don't remember the rooms. And then for 4th, 5th, and 6th, I had what's now Miss Lynn's room. And that was my room for the rest of the day because she was a part-time teacher. So luckily that changed my second year. I got the classroom that I have now, even though it's a small room. Upstairs, I had these large science classrooms. Now I have a tiny little math room, and I usually have to have 28 to 39 students most I've ever had for any length of time, with 39 students, and you have to run labs in these small things, which not the ideal situation, but like the culture of the school and the students that I teach, like make everything worthwhile for me. Go ahead. So I had always meant to start a debate team, but I never got around to it. So the man in the center there, Stephen Stewart, started the debate team at high school in 2007. And once he started it, he recruited me about halfway through the year, and pretty much the rest is history. Now, Mr. Stewart, at the age of 77, had a heart attack at a debate tournament. We didn't know it at the time. We found out later that day. And died a couple months later. And so the team has been pretty much run by me ever since, with a brief period when we actually had 2 advisors after that. And now, one of the things, if you ever plan to be a teacher, plan on doing something for school culture. If you're trying to get hired as a teacher, one of the things a lot of people will do is they'll volunteer when they apply. You can go on. When they apply for a job, that they'll notice that, oh, there's an opening for a volleyball coach or a basketball coach or a softball coach. Now, a lot of teachers will take these, and after 2 years, you'll notice these teachers punt them and stop doing it because they use it as their foot in the door. Because a lot of times a school will care more about a specific sports position, for example, than the actual teaching position that they need to fill. So they'll get a, that's how you get various people who have credentials outside their area. But one of the important things to almost any school is extracurriculars and school culture. Now, some of you that go to Milpitas High School might be a little surprised to see a couple of names on here, but for on and off maybe 6 years, I was one of the advisors to the robotics club. It started less because of the robotics, more because the robotics kids, the advisors were from off campus, and the kids from robotics knew that at the time, I carpooled with the activities director. That's Janet Boyer, who's retiring this year from art. And so they knew that if they needed to get any paperwork done, I had a captive audience to literally like bug her about it for an hour all the way home and all the way to school if they needed. So they recruited me for about 5 or 6 years to be their paperwork advisor for the robotics club, and spent many hot afternoons in that tiny little shack behind the dance room, which used to be the auto shop, by the way, until the auto teacher got led away in handcuffs for illegally selling the cars that were donated that the students worked on. The Gamma Club, some of you don't know this, but we used to have a club that on Memorial Day weekend, we would take Friday off and we'd go to Fanime as a field trip. So this was actually 3 clubs getting together, realizing that, hey, we've got similar interests, we've got similar teachers advising us. So it was centered between my room and Mr. Hodges' room. And the gamers, the anime club, and the Magic the Gathering club all got together to like pool their resources. Then there was Make a Change, which was associated with Camp Everytown. It died out after a while. And for a brief period of time, they recruited me to try and help out with Model UN. I think there's another club. At one point, I was asked to be the Surf Club's advisor. It's like, yeah, that didn't quite fly. So that's my journey to where we are now and how I became a teacher and a coach. So, questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. I actually didn't know a lot of these things, even though you're my debate advisor. I only knew like up to the part where like you came to Milpitas High School and then like took over like debate advising and stuff. But I find your story really interesting. Thank you for sharing. So for all the people that are listening in right now, If you have any questions, then feel free to ask them in the chat box. And while I'll give everyone like 1 or 2 minutes to think and then ask. And until then, I guess I'll ask some questions. So originally I remember you said that you wanted to go into like the physics path, right? And things like
Right.
that. So what made you want to change into like rather than becoming like a physicist or like a law path kind of person, what made you want to teach instead? Like when did you make that decision like, oh, I want to teach rather than go down these other routes?
Well, let's see. As to not doing physics per se, that's when I got to my junior level physics classes, doing tensors, large matrices, triple integrals, surface integrals, things like that. And it just wasn't fun anymore. And like I said, I had been traveling around the country with this team. Now, it was a little bit different than it is now. When I was in high school, our 30 or 40 team members would all pile onto a school bus, and our 5'1", 65-year-old coach, little lady, would drive us all over the state, or sometimes even as far to other states. And when I got to this school in this all-boys Catholic school in Massachusetts, every time we went somewhere, they had to hire out buses, for example, for $1,000 at a minimum. So it's like this huge. But I ended up taking the kids eventually on my own to various tournaments all over the country, and I liked the relationships and mentoring that I was doing, and I realized that that's where I had a lot more to share with people that way. With law, my problem with law, it's ironic because, again, as a debater, I did a lot of paperwork. And back when I debated, I had to carry like a dolly with 4 or 5 boxes of photocopied evidence to every tournament. And doing all this stuff, I realized early on that law isn't necessarily, especially patent law, isn't about arguing in court. It's all paperwork leading up to it. And that's, now ironically, there's obscene amounts of paperwork for high school or for teaching school too. But I didn't see a potential to develop the relationships and help people as much with law as I did with education. I guess education is almost more instant gratification than law.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, like that's basically one of the questions I had. And yeah, so I guess no one else has any questions because there's nothing in the chat box, but I'll just ask another question. Okay, so why do you wear Hawaiian shirts? Like, so like, I know that you're known for that, and like, you know, at tournaments, everybody knows you as like the teacher who wears Hawaiian shirts. So what made you like Hawaiian shirts so much?
So, the best way to describe this is Hawaiian shirts are my yoga pants. Like, they're comfy. They, no matter what, as long as they're big enough, because I'm a large person, as long as they're big enough, they present a, how do I want to say it? Like an image that's fairly consistent, but fits my like personality. Whereas if I'm wearing like buttoned, like long sleeve shirts or anything with like that you button up at the top, it's just uncomfortable for me. Suits are not comfortable in my eyes. And it's like I said, what about there was something I was saying around. Oh, once you get to a certain realization that it's not your outfit that is intimidating or controlling the behavior or inspiring the behavior, there's different schools of thought there on what actually has people behave in classes, for example. then it's just more comfortable.
I see. And so we did get another question in the chat box. Is it harder to get a job in teaching with a bachelor's than with a master's degree?
Okay, so here's the thing. It's less about which degree you have and more about what your degree's in. If you're trying to get a job as an English teacher, that's going to be a fight. Grade school teacher, kindergarten teacher, those type of things, that's going to be a fight. If you're in science, math, then it's a lot easier, no matter what your degree is in. Because those are always, especially in our area, for example, people who are in it for the job and not for the school and the kids, the moment they get a better offer from a tech firm, it's bye. So there's always openings in those areas. Even in the areas that aren't as tech heavy as us, it's like, it's more about what you're credentialed in. So one thing that also might help is not necessarily your master's of education, but if you get a master's credential in administration, which some of the teachers at, for example, Milpitas High School have done, that puts them on the track where the school could tap them to be an assistant principal, or even if not an assistant principal, like in title, but in function. For example, like activities directors sort of act as assistant principals. Some schools actually have assistant principals in charge of activities instead of activities directors. So if you really want to up your chances, you might want to get a degree in, or a master's degree in educational administration, even more than getting your master's degree in a subject. Although, when you're talking about, one of the other things that happens in education is sometimes seniority creeps a little bit too much into it. So for example, you may have the master's degree and want to teach the AP class for your department, but the teacher who's teaching the AP class, or the teacher who's assigning them, is assigning them based on seniority a lot of the time. Not necessarily as much at Milpitas High School as some other schools, but yeah. So it a lot of times works out to seniority even more than just the education.
Okay, nice. So hopefully that answered Jackie's question. I think that was a really good lengthy response. So another question I had was, what colleges did you apply to? Because I know you said you applied to 14 schools, so which ones, if you can remember?
So Caltech turned me down, MIT turned me down, Dartmouth turned me down, U of Chicago turned me down, Reed turned me down, Rose-Hulman turned me down. I got waitlisted at Davidson, waitlisted at Furman, which is odd because I had a scholarship there, but they accept at the time, they accepted 90 or so % of their students early admission. So there are some schools that will accept you better based on early admission, because that's where they do a lot of their acceptances. And let's see, I got priority waitlisted at Carnegie Mellon.
Carnegie, okay.
So it was basically, when I was deciding to go to school, a choice between WPI, which had accepted me outright, and Carnegie Mellon, which I was on the priority wait list, which functionally, if you're on the priority wait list, you're functionally in. They just can't. So they have two different levels of wait list. Okay. There's a couple of colleges that do that.
And why did you choose the colleges that you applied to? How did you do research?
Well, actually, you didn't ask me why I chose the school I applied.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Went to. Because I had to, so you guys are going to laugh.
Okay.
So, and let this be an object lesson to everybody here. So at the time, in April and May of 1988, I was trying to decide between Polytechnic Institute and Carnegie Mellon. So, and you're gonna laugh. So there's this girl I met at debate camp in summer of '87. and her parents moved her to Newland in Connecticut. And so that's who I went to prom with. And I went to prom. By the way, I got at the school I went to, if you had less than 3 excused absences, you got to tell one of your teachers, final? I don't need no final, bye. So all of that, I was absent maybe 40 times during school, but all for debate tournaments, except for one. I got my, when I went up to prom in Connecticut, I stopped in at WPI for a few minutes on my way to the airport and got it declared a college visitation. So it was an excused absence. So I still got to tell my English teacher I wasn't taking the final. But yeah, right after I went to prom, I made my decision between Carnegie Mellon and WPI. And WPI was closer to Connecticut. So about 3 or 4 weeks after I had like made my college decision, we broke up. So yeah, definite object lesson for some of you.
Yeah.
And the colleges I applied to, now the honest truth is I applied to WPI because they sent me an application with a free application. Okay. Because as a National Merit semifinalist, I was getting lots of college mail. So some of the colleges would send me applications that didn't have an application fee. It's like, okay. So there's about 4 colleges that I applied to that I didn't have to pay the fees for. Caltech, okay, I was into physics. Why wouldn't I want to go to Caltech? MIT, same thing. Even though MIT is a better graduate school than it is an undergraduate school. And theoretically, it's the same for Caltech. God, I can't remember why I chose Reed. I wanted to try something on the West Coast, I think. But I think they also sent me a free application. Rose-Hulman sent me a free application. Furman I applied to because I got nominated to be a Furman Scholars Program. So if I went there, I would have had a significant scholarship. But it was a small Southern, like Presbyterian or, well, it was a church-funded like private school, and that I don't. And Davidson, well, Davidson was a right next door, and that was supposed to be a fallback school.
Okay, and what about Dartmouth?
Oh, I don't know. I was like looking over the Ivy Leagues, and it's like I'd already applied to Caltech and MIT, and it's like small, live in the woods almost. But I think I flubbed my interview on that one. I'm not sure how well I did on my MIT interview either. So.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, those are all the questions that I have, and it looks like there's no more questions in the chat box. So I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. And yeah, so that's about it. And if you have any questions or anything, Mr. Schletzbaum?
Nope. Okay. I'm good if you're good.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.